if you do the research again, a theory called the Ovist theory. It's spelled O-V-I-S-T. It's pronounced A-H-V-I-S-T. The Ovist theory, I state, was proven by a Professor Jacques Loeb of Stanford University back in the 50s, 1953 through 5. The Ovist theory states that the embryo develops from the egg alone and does not require spermatozoon in order to begin the promulgation of mitosis. In other words, a woman can impregnate herself and bring to term without a male being around, producing the male spermatozoon. The prevailing medical theory now is called epigenesis, and therefore I state through these other researchers that epigenesis is not proven necessary, and yet it is what everybody now in this heterogeneous makeup in the United States pretty much believes in. Also, however, this begins to propose some other proponents, which even if you might accept those, may not accept the latter one. It means that the female, if we're going to go by RNA DNA factor, was probably formed before the male. You cannot get a man from a man. You cannot get a woman from a man, but you can get a man from a woman, and you can get a woman from a woman. This is what I propose the old church heads had to change, had to delete from the books that talked about it, and had to delete from the book that you refer to as the Bible. For you see, males cannot reproduce themselves, and without females, the species phylum of man on earth as we understand him would not be in existence. And there was a time when that species was threatened. Okay. Now we get to the light stuff, or should I say, the heavier contention. Dr. Edward Bischoff, an MD, started what is called the modern acceptance of the theory of epigenesis. That was started in 1864, for those of you taking notes. 1854, for those of you taking notes. That means that the zygote and uterine development by union of sperm and egg is what Bishop's theory was. His theory has been accepted. It is only a theory. For centuries, people had believed in, and some people still do believe in, what is called parthenogenesis. Parthenogenesis. And the ancient Parthenon in Greece was a product of a culture that believed in parthenogenesis, having been given to them by some ancients called Akkadians and Natufians, who believed in the parthenogenic receptor of the human egg, and that female was only one of the regenerators of that, and that when man fell, then the thought of epigenesis even occurred. Before that time, it was understood that complete cyclic birth for a God-man had to be parthenogenic. That was their belief. In the year 1955, 4 very prominent British doctors of medicine, Dr. Stanley Balfour Lynn, Dr. Bernard Camber, Dr. David Wynne Williams, and Dr. A.E. Moron, all studied some 10 cases of virgin births and agreed that in some strange way, indeed, parthenogenesis had to have happened. The most famous study case was that of Emma Marie Jones. She was a German woman who became impregnated during the Blitzkrieg time in 1944 at Hitler's Germany. This happened at the height of the war, and this woman was encased, entombed, if you would, in a castle. Fortunately, there was a stream underground, and there were lots of canned provisions for over 15 months. She was found to have been in her 7th month of pregnancy when rescued. That has never been explained by the so-called medical sciences of this day, but was a common occurrence, especially under the stress of entombment in many ancient times. We'll look into that later too. If the Ovis theory is to be even propagated and definitely accepted, then we must begin to see what kind of conceptuality brought this into being. How can we begin to say that this may have been the way? And what does this mean that the species of human on earth actually is? We see in studying classical history and into looking into what the ancients have said that a lot of different practices go on and a lot of different worships are coming about or are beginning to be dropped. The question has always been, and you've heard it posed before, which came first, the chicken or the egg? And I think the old axiom was, which came first, the chicken or the egg on the chick, or the chicken on the egg? I ask you for a vote. I want you to raise your hand if you believe, when I ask it, that the chicken came first, and then I want you to raise your hand if you believe that the egg came first, but I don't want you to raise both hands, nor do I want you to vote twice. Okay? If you believe that the first creature was the chicken and not the egg, raise your hand. Okay, roughly around 20 people. Please lower your hands. If you believe it was the egg, please raise your hand. Which way is it? Okay. About 31 people. How many didn't vote because you don't know which you don't want to be made a fool of, so you're just not going to commit? There you go, young troop. All right. That figures. All right. Fence centers, placaters, politicians. All right. Well, this obviously has to be the chicken. I mean, doesn't it? You know, what kind of doubt could there be that's not the chicken? Especially since in 1975 at Stanford University, they connected a vibrational detective sensor to an unfertilized egg and got a rhythmic pulsating beat just like that of a human heart. That experiment has been repeated knowingly 230 times with the same results on an unfertilized egg. What is an unfertilized egg? Anyone real intelligent here, right quick? Yes. No rooster around. No rooster was there. Well, then what does that do about the chicken and the rooster? But then we said a chicken and an egg, huh? Not a hen and an egg, not a rooster and an egg, but a chicken and an egg. This would mean that possibly there was some kind of a life pulse in an egg generated by the female that did not receive fertilization. A life pulse. Obviously, then the thing would be, are there any other species in nature, plant, animal, otherwise, that could begin to substantiate that or show possibly the same kind of proclivity? How many have ever seen an acorn or cut an acorn in half? Just raise your hands briefly. Interesting enough, if you look at that acorn, there's an imprint right there where the seed should be. And in many cases, it looks like a full-grown oak tree. Or there's actually a formation before they begin to genetically mutate some of your acorns. When it grew naturally, what looked like a big oak tree, which showed where that little seed might grow and what it might grow into. Also, the silk moth, little lowly silk moth, reproduces itself without a mate. And in fact, if the moth mates, it cannot produce silk, and it dies soon after mating. A lowly aphid, some call it an aphid, I call it an aphid. Little old lowly bug, if you would, reproduces without a mate, and yet the phylum of man, supposed to be able to subjugate and conjugate with just about anything on earth, can't do such. The Egyptian, of course, a very non-essential, backward, non-pyramid building society, had a very interesting thing. They worship almost what is behind me on the wall, a scarab, which we refer to as the scarab beetle. Scarab is a very interesting creature, has a 7-year cycle, and at that time, if it does not mate, it reproduces. If it does not mate, it reproduces. Up till that time,